Pablo Escobar and El Chapo, and how they spent millions on the most exotic and luxurious things in the world. Escobar had a whole private zoo at his estate in Colombia. Chapo had a diamond-encrusted pistol that he took everywhere with him, and this prized possession even had his initials written on it. But it's not just them, folks. There are many more like them. In this video, we're going to talk about El Mencho, the most wanted man in Mexico. We're going to tell you all about his insane lifestyle and his billionaire status. Before we get into his glamorous lifestyle, let's take a look at his rise to power. Most Mexican drug lords of his generation are in prison or dead, but not Nemesio Asegura Cervantes. At 56 years old, the kingpin has never even been caught. In fact, the United States government is offering up to $10 million to anybody that offers information leading to his arrest.
Tonight, the DEA is offering $10 million for information leading to the arrest of the Mexican drug kingpin known as El Mencho.
El Mencho is the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG. He's been running the game for at least 20 years now, and he's showing no signs of stopping. His operations have expanded far and wide across Mexico and several states in America. Needless to say that Mencho has a whole drug empire, but it didn't happen overnight. In fact, it all started a long time ago. It's no secret that most people in this life were exposed to it from a very young age, which is what happened with Cervantes as well. He left elementary school after his 5th year when he was hired to look after avocado fields. But it wasn't any ordinary avocado fields. The Milenio Cartel owned them.
The Milenio Cartel used to be one of the most financially powerful cartels in Mexico.
The family was trafficking marijuana and hiding it in the fruits, and Mencho was an active participant. So he's been in the game since he was a kid. With time, he became a plantation watchman and even got promoted to station watchman and even got promoted to trafficker. But he had bigger dreams than avocados. So he left the fields behind and illegally moved to Northern California. Once in the States, El Mencho became involved with heroin and methamphetamine gangs and started to build his network. He started taking frequent trips to Mexico and the United States, often under different aliases such as Roberto Salgado or Miguel Valadez. He was even arrested by the San Francisco police when he was 19 for stolen property and carrying a loaded gun. In 1989, he was arrested again in San Francisco for selling drugs, and he was deported back, but he re-entered the States. 3 years after, he was arrested once again, this time on federal drug charges in California. Mencho and his brother, Abraham, were caught carrying out a heroin deal. Abraham was in charge of the transaction while Nemesio was on the lookout. Although he was much younger than his brother, Mencho recognized that the men were being set up and even warned his brother. Something with the police caught on his wiretap. 3 weeks after the incident, the two were arrested. El Mencho claimed that he wasn't involved in the deal, but ultimately, he had to plead guilty to save his brother from a lifetime prison sentence. He was sentenced to 5 years and imprisoned at the Big Spring Correctional Center for 3 of those years, before being released and deported back to Mexico at the age of 30. But nobody could have stopped the rise of El Mencho. Once back in Mexico, Nemesio was back to old habits with the Milenio Cartel. He was a full member now, and he was going all the way to the top. He started as a member of the assassin squad that protected drug lord El Maradona, but he was arrested by Mexican authorities in August 2003. At the same time, a rival gang called Los Zetas in Michoacan, which forced the Valencia family to exile to Jalisco. But Mencho relocated in Guadalajara. There, he formed an agreement with the mighty Sinaloa cartel, headed by El Chapo. Under his alliance, Nemesio, and his group took care of the Sinaloa cartel's operations in the states of Colima and Jalisco for the next few years. In 2009, Milenio Cartel's leader Oscar Nava Valencia, also called El Lobo, was arrested. Less than a year later, his brother El Tigre was caught as well. With these downfalls, the Milenio Cartel started to fall apart, and El Mencho stepped in. But other members from within didn't make it easy, which led to an internal war, and the once great Milenio Cartel was split into 2 halves. One side was called La Resistencia, the Resistance, while the other was known as Los Matazatas, the Zata Killers, headed by Mencho. The two groups fought for territory in Jalisco. To make their claim stronger, the Zeta Killers started a propaganda campaign against their rivals, denouncing extortions by the resistance against civilians, businessmen, and government authorities, and eventually won their war. After that, the group changed its name to CJ&G. As the leader of CJ&G, El Mencho grew his organization at an exceptional rate. The group went from being a small territorial expansion to one of the leading criminal organizations in the country, and Mencho himself became a most wanted man. His rise came after his aggression and untraditional displays of public violence.
Delta 1.
Hey, ¿quién habla?
Mira bien, hijo de tu soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tu gente a la verga, soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tus partidas, si no te voy a partir tu madre, tienes toda tu bola de perros. Te tengo identificado 30 güeyes. Hasta tus putos perros te voy a matar si no te relajas, güey.
With Mexico's former top crime bosses gone, the path to the top was clear for El Mencho. He expanded his operations in Jalisco and surrounding states. The CJ&G fought off other groups in the region, and they didn't stop at anything. The group even had direct attacks against Mexico's special forces, which earned El Mencho a reputation among authorities as the principal enemy of the state. According to
This is who El Mencho was and what happened to him. He was widely known as the reported leader of the Jalisco New Generation Group, one of Mexico's most powerful underground groups. For years, he was one of the most wanted figures by both Mexican authorities and the DEA in the United States. His organization was known for its strong presence across several states and its ability to challenge security forces directly. Yesterday, Mexican special forces carried out a large operation in Jalisco after tracking his location. During the mission, officials say he was seriously injured and later passed away while being transported for medical treatment. After the news broke, there were intense reactions in parts of Mexico, including roadblocks and clashes. Mexico is going through a tense moment after his passing. In just a few hours, members loyal to his group reacted by setting fire to cars and blocking highways in several states. Schools were closed in some cities, flights at major airports were canceled, and authorities warned people to stay indoors as a precaution. Government forces have since worked to clear those. Did you know a cartel boss once blew in daylight? Then left behind a wooden sign that read, "We don't ambush, we arrive on time." His name was El Mencho, leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. He never spoke to the press, never showed his face, but when he acted, it was military, precise, and loud. In April 2015, he learned a prisoner convoy would pass a highway curve in Jalisco. He didn't block the road. He buried mines beneath it. His men waited in silence. At 9:40 a.m., the convoy turned and the ground exploded. Video shows fireballs consuming armored trucks. 11 officers died instantly. Survivors crawled away barefoot, bleeding. El Mencho wasn't there, but nailed to a tree beside the blast was a wooden sign, painted in red. "We don't ambush, we strike on time." Some say it was revenge, others say it was a test. But from that day on, the military changed how they moved through Jalisco. They weren't just fighting a cartel. They were fighting someone who thought like a general and struck like a ghost. So tell me, was that a message or a declaration of war?
Did a romantic relationship help authorities track down El Mencho? That's what Mexican officials are now suggesting. For years, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, was one of the world's most powerful cartel bosses. He led the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, one of the most violent and fast-growing criminal networks in the world. He was wanted in the United States with a $15 million reward on his head, but this week, Mexican federal forces located him in Topolpa, Jalisco, and after a fierce shootout, he died from injuries sustained during the operation. But how did they find him? Mexico's defense minister says the intelligence that helped pinpoint his location stemmed from someone he was romantically involved with. Officials have not yet named the person or confirmed the nature or length of the relationship. They also haven't revealed the circumstances in which the information was given, but they are clear that the lead was connected to someone close to him. Meanwhile, attention is also turning to his wife, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, known as La Jefa or the Boss. Authorities have previously described her as overseeing the cartel's financial and legal operations, including dozens of businesses linked to the group. She was released early from prison last year for good conduct. Since then, her whereabouts have not been publicly confirmed. The fallout from his death has been immediate. Cartel gunmen torched vehicles, blocked highways, and sparked unrest across multiple states, including in areas preparing to host World Cup matches later this year. So now the questions are mounting. Was this the result of a personal vulnerability, or simply a sophisticated intelligence operation that exploited one? Either way, for a man once described as untouchable, it appears the breakthrough came from someone inside his inner circle.
Thousands of Americans in Mexico are being told to shelter in place after the leader of that country's most powerful drug cartel was killed over the weekend. His death led to an eruption of violence across several Mexican states, forcing airlines to cancel flights out of the region.
Chaos hit the streets of Puerto Vallarta, the Mexican state of Jalisco, and beyond Sunday, as Mexico's most notorious drug cartel fiercely retaliated after soldiers killed their leader, Nemesio Ruben Osquera Cervantes, widely known as El Mencho. Osquera Cervantes was wounded during an operation to capture him in Jalisco and died while being flown to Mexico City. The cartel he led has the highest cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine trafficking capacity in Mexico, according to the U.S. State Department, which had previously offered up to $15 million for his capture. The violence also hit Jalisco's capital, Guadalajara, just a few months before Mexico's second largest city is scheduled to host FIFA World Cup matches.
Activamos el código rojo.
In response, Jalisco's governor activated a code red security alert, suspending public transit, large events, and school activities as authorities across Mexico raced to clear more than 250 roadblocks created by the cartel.
We don't know if we're safe. We don't know if they're going to cancel the flight.
Olga Medina saw smoke rising over Puerto Vallarta from the airport Sunday. She ultimately did make it home to Houston before airlines grounded flights in and out of the resort town.
I feel safe now, but I'm still shaking because I can't believe this has happened to us.
Others were not so fortunate. Adrian Moorfield and TJ Perry went to Puerto Vallarta to celebrate Perry's birthday. They were supposed to fly home to Dallas Sunday. Now they're stranded.
You're kind of there indefinitely.
There were no outgoing flights until Thursday. That does not take into consideration whether or not roads will even be open, the airport will be operating again.
Now, it's worth noting that the Trump administration has previously threatened to use the U.S. military to target Mexican drug cartels. And while this specific case was a Mexican operation, it's well known that the American government regularly shares resources and intel with Mexico to counter.
Mexico used U.S. intelligence to kill one of the world's most powerful cartel bosses, and now the cartel is retaliating. Here's everything you need to know. So major events are unfolding in Mexico after a Mexican military operation killed the country's most wanted drug lord, El Mencho. He is the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or the CJNG, and the cartel is furious. And cities like Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara, CJNG members have gone on a rampage. They're attacking some police officers, setting some vehicles, buses, and stores on fire, and blocking some roads in retaliation. So Mexican forces, with help from the U.S. intelligence, pulled this off, and previously the U.S. had a $15 million bounty on the cartel leader's head. So the retaliation has caused some disruptions at places like Guadalajara's international airport, and the retaliation has led to some flight disruptions. Some airlines like Air Canada temporarily suspended flights to Puerto Vallarta, and the U.S. Embassy quickly issued a security alert urging American citizens in several states to shelter in place until further notice. A flight restriction was also put in place over Tapalpa, Jalisco, showing the seriousness of the situation. This is serious, y'all. El Mencho had a long history of drug trafficking, including a U.S. conviction for conspiracy to distribute heroin in '94. He served 3 years for that charge, and then when he was released, he returned to Mexico. Since 2017, he had been indicted several times in the U.S., with the most recent indictment being April 2022, and that indictment charged him with conspiracy to distribute meth, coke, fentanyl, and for illegal importation into the United States, as well as several firearms offenses and operating a continuing criminal enterprise under the Drug Kingpin Enforcement Act. So Mexican authorities are now dealing with some retaliation from the CJNG, which is known as one of Mexico's most powerful and dangerous criminal organizations. The cartel's members are specifically targeting military forces for now, and it's hard to tell if this is going to turn into a full-scale war between the cartel and the Mexican government, and the full impact of El Mencho's death is only starting to unfold. This is a developing story, and I'll do my best to keep you updated as more information becomes available.
And so feared that just hearing his name can silence an entire room. He is the most feared man in Mexico. With a single phone call, lives can disappear. Entire families can be erased, not as a threat, but as a warning. That fear is his real power. El Mencho isn't just another drug lord. He commands a criminal empire worth billions, enforced not by publicity, but by absolute terror. While others chased fame, flaunted watches, and built narco mansions, he vanished into the mountains, protected by killers and surrounded by silence. Some believe his fortune surpasses El Chapo's fortune. Today we dive into the world of El Mencho, uncovering how much money his cartel really makes, how massive his fortune might be, and what his hidden lifestyle actually looks like. El Mencho didn't come from power or money. He came from nothing. Born in a tiny village in Michoacan in 1966, he grew up farming avocados and dropped out of school by the 5th grade. As a teenager, he was already working for local traffickers guarding marijuana fields at just 14. Like many in his situation, he crossed into the U.S. chasing a better life, but ended up dealing drugs and got locked up. After doing time, he was deported, and that's when things got serious. Back in Mexico, he briefly became a cop, then flipped sides and joined the MENCHO cartel. His rise was fast. He married into the Valencia clan known as Los Quines and gained power quickly. By the 2000s, he was running key territories, feared for how cold and calculating he was. When the MENCHO cartel fractured, he made his move, took over the strongest faction called Los Torcidos and rebranded it as CJNG. From there, everything exploded. His cartel expanded fast, armed to the teeth, and wasn't afraid to take on the Mexican military helicopter in 2015 to stop his capture. Even as CJNG grew into the most violent and powerful cartel on Earth, almost no one knew what he looked like. He didn't do anything flashy, no interviews, no big mansions. Just safe houses in the mountains, loyal guards, and silence. A ghost with billions and an army, hiding in plain sight.
Mexico's most wanted man, the drug lord known as MENCHO, has been killed in a military operation with the help of U.S. intelligence. He was the leader of the feared Jalisco New Generation drug cartel, and the U.S. had previously offered a reward of $15 million for information leading to his arrest. Well, the journalist Adam Hancock's following the story for us in Mexico City joins us now. Adam, talk to us about this operation against MENCHO and also how the U.S. has supported it.
Yeah, the operation took place on Sunday morning in the town of Tapalpa, which is in the central western state of Jalisco, and it was targeted to try and capture MENCHO, but it actually turned into somewhat of a gunfight between members of the cartel and the Mexican military. A number of cartel members were killed, 3 more were injured, including MENCHO. They were taken on a flight here to Mexico City, but they died from their injuries. And this man has been evading the authorities for a long time. He's a notorious drug cartel leader here in Mexico, leading one of the most feared drug cartels in the country. And we now know that the US intelligence was actually involved in the operation to capture him. It's been a while now that President Trump has been talking about the need for Mexico to do more to crack down on drug cartels. He's been very angry about drugs being exported across the border, including fentanyl. And we understand that the operation that took place on Sunday morning here in Mexico, the US were involved in that in terms of intelligence, but it was Mexican special forces who went in. They tried to capture him, but they ended up killing him during a gunfight between cartel members and the military.
You talk about that gunfight. Just talk to us as well about the violence that we've seen now more broadly across Mexico as a result.
Yeah, it's been quite astonishing, really, throughout the day how this has escalated across the country, not just in Jalisco state, where this all began, but in a number of other states, including very popular tourist destinations as well, where we've seen plumes of smoke rising across the city. Tourists have been told to stay in their hotels. The US Embassy here in Mexico, they've warned US citizens to shelter in place in a number of states. We've seen a barricade set up by cartel members blocking major highways, vehicles being set alight, shops being set alight, and just general violence across the country. And of course, whilst it's a big moment to take out one of the biggest cartel leaders, you do have to question what cost this comes at, because right now there's a real fear here in Mexico about this violence and whether or not it's going to spread, and also the impact that it's going to have on the tourism industry, and even the impact it's going to have on the World Cup, which is taking place in just a few months' time here.
And Mexico no stranger to violence this kind of type, but is this different this time around, do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I've been speaking to people here today in Mexico City who've been here for quite a while, and they said this is the first time in a long time that they remember the national security situation being as dicey as this. There have been flare-ups in the past when notable kingpins from these cartels are captured. For example, El Chapo, you might remember a few years ago. Often a void is left within the cartel, and there are battles and infighting between cartel members trying to take control and take over who was taken out. So it's not completely unusual. Mexicans are very used to cartel violence. It's a common part of life here. But I think this widespread violence that we've seen today, and particularly tourist areas being targeted, and airlines having to cancel flights and airports being closed. That's certainly something.
Were you ever scared for your life?
Every day. That's how you live. Anybody that says that they're not scared of that type of life is probably lying, you know? I think being scared is very important in order for you to keep yourself alive. Every time that I would get close to somebody, that person would get murdered, and it was a circle that was not ending. So when talking to people that are in this environment, and when talking to people that think that they're gangsters or they're about that life, you can tell right away if they're lying or not, just by asking them what kind of weapon they use. So you can tell when someone is an expert, and you can tell when someone is just bluffing on what they're saying.
Now that MENCHO is dead, who will take over and become his successor? Let's talk about it. Now, MENCHO has one son, a person called Ruben Oseguera. However, he is serving life in prison plus 30 years at the ADX Supermax in Colorado currently. We would have to assume that the most likely successor is MENCHO's stepson, a person called Juan Carlos Valencia, aka 03. 03's mother is a woman called Rosalinda Valencia. At one point, she was married to MENCHO. His father was a drug trafficker, all his uncles were drug traffickers, and he has known MENCHO for decades, obviously being his stepson. He heads a group called Grupo Elite, which you've probably seen in various videos. They're one of the armed wings of CJNG. He was actually born in California and is only 42 years old. Very connected, very high up, very young. Definitely, for sure, I would assume would be the successor most likely. Now, other people that could take over include a guy called Audias Flores Silva, aka El Jardinero, aka the Gardener. He is an extremely powerful regional leader of CJNG. Born in Michoacan, he not only controls areas of his home state, but as well as Jalisco and most of the Mexican state of Nayarit. He controls both economical and operational resources on behalf of the cartel. Keep in mind, he has a $5 million bounty on his head by this country. Another person that will continue to be a major higher up is this guy, a man called Gonzalo Mendoza Gaitan, aka El Sapo. El Sapo is said to be the plaza boss of Puerto Vallarta, which is a big-time stronghold. Keep in mind, he also has extensive control, and the fact that he controls Puerto Vallarta, which is a tourist destination, he's done a great job allegedly funneling money through various nightclubs, bars. That money laundering ability is very good, and he's actually been quite trusted. No matter how you slice it, the death of MENCHO is gigantic. In fact, I never thought it would actually happen in terms of him being killed. That said, there are very powerful people that are underneath him or were underneath him. It's anybody's guess. That said, I would assume that his stepson takes over. That said, there's a lot of high-profile people up top. They're still a very high-level drug trafficking organization. In fact, they're one of the biggest in.
But if he's behind bars, how come he hasn't been extradited?
Because the Mexican government will not extradite him. They won't extradite him over here. We've asked.
Was there a difference between him and El Chapo? Because obviously the Mexican government worked closely with the U.S. government to bring El Chapo here. Why are the rules different for Rafael Quintero?
Because El Chapo was never really he was never ahead of anything. El Chapo was very prolific dealer, but he was never in charge of the Sinaloa cartel or nothing. El Chapo and Güero Palma were just factions of the old Guadalajara cartel. Actually, they made Chapo bigger than what he is. He wasn't a major cartel boss, where Carlos Quintero was a boss.
Okay, so let's stop there.